Hello, today we're going to stitch a scallop. And you're thinking, well, you already did that on your regular YouTube channel. And if you've seen that video, yes, I did. I made these little scallops on the YouTube channel, but this one is going to be different. This one is going to be fancy. And I'm going to use my hexagon here that I haven't worked on this for a while. If you've been here since the beginning, you might remember this piece that I had started working on along with my scroll. And then I started another one, but I've set it aside and I decided today is the day to get it back out again. I don't have a good spot for these big scallops on my scroll, so I think they'll fit in on this piece really well. So let's see. Let's draw our scallop shape first, and it's kind of got a rounded top that narrows at the bottom, and it's got these two little bits at the bottom, and then it's got a series of vertical radiating lines that fan out from the center point. And that is what we're going to be recreating. Now, I'm going to be doing something called thread blending. I've gathered up a variety of threads here that I think match the colors that I see in my scallop shell, and I'm going to start by creating those vertical lines that fan out. And as soon as I started stitching this, it seemed like a good idea to use a pale color thread that would blend in with the background, but it's really hard to see. So I'm going to switch over and use a different thread, but I just wanted to show you this because I made some changes when I did this a second time, but I wanted to show you a couple of things that I did in this first one. So I did the vertical fanned out stitches at the top. I'm also going to go back in and add some more spokes that start about halfway up and go to the top. And that was when I decided that I needed to stop recording. So here's what my finished shell looked like. I really liked the way it turned out. And then I decided that I was going to start over using a darker color thread to create the spokes so that you could see what I was doing more easily. And I would not recommend using a very contrasting thread color with your background. I would suggest using something that you can still see but that blends in better with your background, because these are construction lines. They won't be actually part of the finished piece, but you don't necessarily want them to show through. So I'm doing a series of long stitches that kind of fan out from a middle point and then spread out where the top of the shell will be. Now, I'm just doing this freehand because, again, if you've been around for a while, you know that's how I'm doing things. But if you would prefer to draw some construction lines that would sort of help you know where to stop and start your lines, that would be perfectly good. You can use pencil or some sort of marker that will let your marks disappear after you finished, and that's entirely up to you. I just like the variability and the freedom that I get by not making any marks to guide where my stitches go. But you do want the top end to be, relatively even, but I'll show you how I deal with the unevenness of my stitches when I get back there. And now I'm doing two little fly stitches back to back that create those little sections at the bottom where this shell would attach to the other one on the other side, because scallops are bivalves, so there's two shells that attach in the middle with a muscle. So this is the section where they attach at the bottom. This thread that I'm using now is a dark brown, and it's maybe not the best choice, but I decided, since I've got some still left on my needle, that I'm going to start out doing this next part with the thread that I already have on my needle, and you'll see how I end up using all the other colors as I go along. So now the stitch that I'm doing now, I don't know what it's called in embroidery terms. In weaving terms, we would call this sumac. If I were weaving and I was threading my threads around each other like this, I'd call it sumac, but it is an embroidery stitch. I just don't know what it's called. So the way this works is the motion is similar to a back stitch, but instead of going through the cloth, I'm just threading my needle over and around those spokes that I had stitched on. So it's not, my stitches are not going to the back of the cloth. They're just sitting on the surface. And the way this works is I start out by going over the first thread and then underneath the second one. That's the setup stitch. Now my stitches continue on where I go back over one spoke and then underneath two spokes and then back over one spoke, underneath two spokes, back over one spoke, if that makes sense. So when I get to the other end, we'll try that again. So we're going to go over that first stitch and underneath the next one. Now, you look at where your thread is coming up and you'll go back underneath that spoke and then underneath the next two. So you're always moving ahead by one. You're essentially, what you're doing is you're wrapping the thread around one spoke and then moving ahead to the next spoke, wrapping your thread around it, that one spoke, and then moving ahead to the next spoke. So the thread is traveling underneath the spokes, but you've got this little wrap around the top, which creates these nifty little ridges that recreate the ridges and ripples off a scallop shell really nicely. And they look really cool, especially if you vary the colors and do some color blending, which I'll show you as soon as I run out of this thread. So the other thing that I would mention is the first spoke on either side, I just go over that spoke. So I'm not creating a wrap around that first spoke. I just go over the first spoke, and then I start out the pattern after the first spoke. So over the first spoke, underneath the second one, wrap around the second one, and then underneath the next two. Now that I've finished off that dark rusty colored thread, I'm going to switch to some other thread, and that little rat's nest there, that's left over from the previous one. So what I did was, I'm working with 3 strands of cotton, because the more strands you work with, the faster this is. It's definitely not a fast process. But what I'm doing, instead of working with 3 strands that are the same color, I'm blending the colors together. So I've pulled out one strand off an orangey color, and I'm blending that with 2 strands off that darker rust. So it'll be subtle. And as I work up, if I want to have a subtle color change that's not too dramatic, each time I move up, I'll swap out one of those colors for a new color. If I want to have a really dramatic change in colors, then I'll swap out 2 or 3 or use completely different colors. And then I just go back into the pattern again. Now, one thing that I do that I like to do is I like to start and end my threads in the middle rather than doing that over on the edge. I feel like it's a lot less obvious than if I start and finish right on the edge. And I don't worry about it too much if I can't tell exactly where I finished off. I just start wherever I am, because it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. The other thing that I sometimes do, so I notice that sometimes my stitches that I'm creating were starting to flatten out, but I want it to have a nice curve to reflect the curved shape of a scallop shell. So sometimes, instead of going all the way to the edge, I would just do my stitches in the middle, and I would skip off those 2 outside edges every now and then so that I could keep a nice rounded shape there. And, you know, how often do I do that? Well, if I thought things were getting too flat, I just did it. And if I didn't think things were getting too flat, I just carried on, going all the way to the edge. And this is it. Takes a long time. So I have cut out the parts where I had to rethread the needle, and I would say that this probably took an hour to do this little shell. Each of these little shells probably took me an hour. And if you felt that you didn't want to spend this time doing this, then you totally don't have to. You're making your own piece. You create whichever things you want. If you like the easy way to do the scallop shells, those are great. I just think this one looks really cool. And another tip that I would give you is, remember I mentioned that you're just going around the spokes. You're not going through the cloth behind the spokes at all. So a couple of tips: you can either use the back end, the eye end of the needle, which isn't sharp, so that way you'd be less likely to split the stitches or nick the cloth underneath. Or you could switch to another needle has got a blunt end. I think they're called tapestry needles. They don't have a sharp end. And if you buy specialty needles, they'll tell you on the package whether your needle has a dull end or not. But my needles have long since been separated from their packages, so I don't actually know. I probably don't have a lot of blunt-ended needles around, and so I'm just careful. But if you notice, sometimes when I put my needle underneath the spoke there, I wiggle it around a little bit. That's me just checking that everything's loose, that it's not catching anything underneath there, that those stitches are just in the place that I want them to be. One other tip that I would share is that as you're doing this, you might find that your spokes start to pull in and get tight and pull together. And that is a common thing that happens in weaving as well. And this is essentially a weaving stitch that we're doing here. So what you need to do is do things more loosely. Do not pull in as you're going across your work. Just have the tension really loose across. Well, not so loose that you've got lots of big lumps, but it needs to be looser than you think it needs to be. It's normal for everyone to do that, to have your stitches pull in. Just work more loosely, and you'll notice that my spokes do pull in a bit, but whenever I notice I'm doing that, it's a reminder to myself to just start working more loosely. When you're stitching and your thread is going over and under and looping around, you need more thread than you think you need. So somehow it's human nature to pull in, and you just don't want to do that. You just want to stitch loosely. And now I'm going to use a little bit of that thread before I use it all up to add some more color inside the fly stitches down at the bottom there. And then it'll be time to change my thread color again. And now I've finished off that thread. And again, I'm going to go and pull out my bundle of threads and choose another set of colors, of 3 different colors, and maybe, I don't know, what am I picking this time? This time I'm going with a lighter pink. And did I change my mind? I went with a yellow and an orange this time, I think. So, and I just pick up, relatively close to where I left off. And as I said, it doesn't really matter. So in a shell, the lines generally continue on in rows, but they're not perfect. There's blotches here and there. So creating those blotches by starting in the wrong place creates a much more realistic looking shell than if everything were perfectly lined up. So being a beginner and being imperfect in this case is actually kind of an advantage. And there's not really much to this. I'm just going to keep going all the way to the top. I think I've pretty much given you the technique, and it doesn't change. It just keeps going to the top. On this particular shell, I set it up slightly different than the previous one that I did. So I didn't add those additional spokes about halfway up. Now, if I had put those in, this is about where I would be getting to the point where I would be start start stitching over those spokes. And there's really nothing magical about it. Just when you get to the point where there is an additional spoke, just start including that one. And now, in a hindsight, I'm glad I did the two different versions because it allowed me to see how things look different. And I decided that I personally like the version where I added the extra spokes, even though that doesn't really follow the way that an actual scallop grows. And I thought that this version looked a little bit more like a basket, but that's okay. It's nice to have the two different versions there to have a look at. So as I said, at this point, if you had put in those extra spokes, you would start to incorporate them, and your stitching will take longer because those extra spokes will add extra time, but that's okay. So the threads that I'm using today, I've been trying really hard to not acquire any new to me things. But the other day I was at the secondhand store with my daughter, and then there was this box of embroidery threads for sale. And it was $10, which is more money than I would normally pay for something in the secondhand store. But my daughter looked at me and she said, "Mom, you know you're going to use them. You should get them. Why are you even hesitating?" So I did get them, and they came home with me. So the threads, for the most part, were already wrapped around those little cards, which is great because they don't get tangled that way. But a lot of them had been cut to short lengths, which is perfect for what I'm doing today. So there's no way that I would be tempted to cut a long length of thread, as I'm prone to do. And when you're doing something like this where you want to be changing the colors of the threads to blend them, it works better if you start out with a short length of thread, and then you'll run out, and then you'll have to change to another color, so it reminds you to change. I find if I don't have a short length of thread, then I'll forget to swap it out. And you just keep going and going and going. So you want these threads to be packed quite close together. You want them to pack down but not pull from side to side. It's again very much like tapestry weaving, where if you're a weaver, you might know that when you're doing a tapestry, you want your weft threads, what we call the weft threads, or the threads that I'm either sewing or weaving with, you want them to pack down really tightly so you can't see the warp threads, or in our case, the spokes. Same thing, so you can always add more. It's very rare that somebody adds too many. Mostly people stop before they've added too many. Yeah, when you think you're done, do more. And then I'll just keep going. Because I did not draw a line, guiding lines to tell me how long to make each of my spokes, what I noticed is as I got nearer the top, some of them started to run out before others. But because these spokes are so dark, I don't want to leave the end of the spoke visible because it's not really part of the way that the top of the scallop looks. So that I added a little extra bit to some of the spokes where I thought they stopped too early. I took another stitch to extend those spokes so that I can continue stitching along till I reached the top of the longest ones. I want the top edge to have a smooth curve to it, so I want to be continuing to stitch over all the threads rather than just stopping where some of them run out earlier. But, maybe I could have done that. I don't know. No, I want it to be in a round curved shape rather than a jagged shape. So I do want to add in those extra bits. My progression of thread colors mimicked what I saw in the original shell, which started at the bottom part with a dark area and progressed up to the top, getting lighter and lighter and lighter. But because my background is light, if I'd left the very top also very light, it just sort of disappears into the background. If you feel like that's happening with your piece, what you can do is at the very top, do one row of a slightly brighter color, one or two rows of a slightly brighter color that will give you just an edge at the top that will allow you to see that you've got a shell there a little bit more easily than if it's just sort of petering out. Now the other thing is those two fly stitches at the bottom, I can fill those in as well because I don't necessarily want that section to be transparent, and one fly stitch is probably not going to fill in the whole area. So I just went back in every now and again and added a few more stitches in the different colors that I'm using to fill in that area down at the bottom. And there you go. That is it. So have fun with this stitch. I think they look pretty spectacular when they're done, don't you? Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching and happy stitching, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.